October 14th, 11:42 p.m. A kitchen lit only by the refrigerator door. The hum is low and constant, cold air spills across the tiles. A phone screen lights up the dark. A message arrives, the kind that used to split the night in half. Sharp, personal, slightly unfair. Once your pulse would have jumped, your jaw tightened, words would have formed instantly, defensive, precise, ready to fire back. But tonight nothing happens. Your hand rests against the counter, the light from the fridge glows across your face. You read the message again slowly. Still nothing. No surge of heat. No tightening in the chest. No rehearsed argument assembling itself behind your teeth. Just a strange, almost clinical stillness. You close the refrigerator door. The kitchen falls back into shadow. The phone remains lit in your hand, waiting for a reaction that does not come. And in that quiet, something feels unfamiliar. Because the silence is not suppression. It is not exhaustion. It is not fear. It is absence. The old reaction, the one that used to leap forward like a loyal soldier, is gone. And you don't know when it left. There was a time when your emotions moved quickly, almost militarily. An insult would trigger immediate mobilization. Like General Anthony McAuliffe in Bostonia, December 1944, surrounded, outnumbered, yet responding with one word, nuts. Immediate, defiant, instinctive. Your nervous system once operated like that, decisive and fast. Every slight was a perimeter breach. Every misunderstanding an invasion. Every silence from someone you loved, a coded threat. Your reactions were not random, they were defenses. Carl Jung believed that much of the personality is constructed as armor, adaptive structures formed in response to early emotional climates. The quick wit, the sharp boundary, the dramatic withdrawal, the icy detachment. These were not flaws. They were ranks you earned in invisible wars. And for years they worked. They protected you from humiliation, from abandonment, from feeling small. But armor is heavy, and over time the battles change. Back in the kitchen, October 14th. The message still waits. You set the phone face down on the counter. There is no victory in your calm, no sense of superiority. In fact, what rises instead is something quieter, almost unsettling. If you're not reacting, then who are you? The old you would have written 3 paragraphs by now, precise, surgical, controlled. The old you would have felt righteous, energized. That version of you was predictable. This version feels undefined. Jungian psychology suggests that growth often begins not with addition but subtraction. Parts of the defensive self begin to dissolve. The reflexes you once trusted lose urgency. The psyche recalibrates. And when it does, it can feel like social displacement. Because other people are still interacting with the version of you that no longer exists. They send the message expecting friction. They expect the spark. But the spark does not come. It doesn't happen all at once. You first notice it in small moments. A comment that once would have lingered for days now passes through you in minutes. An argument you would have escalated now feels unnecessary. A person who once intimidated you now appears almost human. The charge is gone. At first you think you're tired. Then you wonder if you're numb. But numbness is heavy, this isn't heavy. It's light. And that lightness is what unsettles you most. Because without the familiar weight of your reactions, you feel exposed. Your personality was partly built around what triggered you. You were the one who doesn't tolerate disrespect. The one who always says something. The one who never lets things slide. And now, you let it slide. Not out of weakness, but because it no longer hooks into you. The bait is still there. The hook just doesn't catch. But here's the part no one talks about. When you outgrow your reactions, you don't just lose the drama. You lose recognition. Friends who bonded with you over shared outrage feel distance. Family members who understood you through your sensitivity notice a change. Even you, looking in the mirror, sense a shift you can't quite articulate. You are less reactive, but also less familiar. Carl Jung believed individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole, often feels like isolation. Because as unconscious defenses dissolve, the personality reorganizes. And reorganization is rarely loud. It happens quietly, in kitchens, in parked cars, in text messages left unanswered. Growth does not always feel empowering. Sometimes it feels like watching your old self walk away without saying goodbye. The phone buzzes again. Another message. This one slightly sharper than the first, testing. You feel your body scan for the old reflex. Nothing. No rush. No script. No war drum. Just breath. You could respond, you probably will, but it won't be from the same place. And that realization carries a strange grief. Because that fiery, reactive version of you once fought so hard to survive. They were loyal, protective, fierce. And now they are dissolving. What replaces them is calmer, but also quieter. And in that quiet, a new loneliness begins to form. Not because you are alone, but because you no longer recognize the emotional language you used to speak. And the world hasn't noticed the translation yet. The refrigerator hums again as the cycle restarts. And standing there in the dim kitchen, you sense something deeper than calm. A separation. Not from others, but from the person you used to be. And the question lingers in the dark. If you are no longer who you were when triggered, then who exactly are you becoming? The next morning arrives quietly. 7:18 a.m. A train platform washed in pale gray light. The air smells faintly of metal and rain. Commuters stand in loose formation, eyes lowered to glowing screens, shoulders angled away from one another like soldiers in a silent truce. You stand among them, coat collar turned up, hands still. A notification flashes across your phone. It's from someone who used to know exactly how to provoke you. You read it. A subtle jab, polite on the surface, precise underneath. Months ago, this would have been enough. Enough to set your thoughts marching. Enough to rehearse a reply before the train even arrived. Enough to feel that familiar tightening, the inner command to defend your position. Now, the platform remains quiet, and so do you. You watch the message the way Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg once studied the map table in the Wolf's Lair, July 20th, 1944, calm on the outside, calculations moving beneath the surface. But unlike him, you are not planning an explosion. You are deciding whether anything needs to happen at all. And for the first time in your life, the answer might be no. There's a loneliness that arrives here. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Subtle. It's the loneliness of no longer participating in emotional rituals that once defined you. Your friends still exchange screenshots of arguments, dissecting tone like battlefield analysts reviewing tactics. They still vent with urgency, still amplify small slights into defining moments. And you sit there listening. You understand them, you remember being them. But something inside you has shifted position. Carl Jung believed that as the psyche matures, it withdraws projections. We stop casting our unresolved fears onto other people. We stop assuming hostility where there is merely difference. We stop needing conflict to define identity. When projection fades, drama fades with it. And drama, strangely, is social glue. Without it, you can begin to feel peripheral. You notice it in conversations. Someone says, "Can you believe what she said to me?" Once you would have leaned forward energized, you would have dissected motives, built alliances, sharpened interpretations. Now you pause. You see layers where before you saw villains. You hear insecurity beneath the aggression, fear beneath the tone, confusion beneath the certainty. Your response softens. Maybe she didn't mean it that way. The table goes quiet. Not hostile, just confused. Because that is not your line, it doesn't fit the script you used to play. And in that silence, you feel the gap widening. You are not superior, you are not detached from humanity. You are simply less combustible. But in groups formed around shared combustion, that difference registers. Psychological growth is rarely celebrated socially. The world is comfortable with predictable reactions. They know how to engage with your defensiveness. They know how to navigate your sensitivity. They know how to anticipate your outrage. But calm is disorienting. It removes the familiar entry points. Carl Jung suggested that individuation separates a person from collective patterns. Not physically, but psychologically. You begin to respond from your center instead of your conditioning. And when you do, the crowd feels further away. Not because you left, but because you stopped echoing. The train arrives with a metallic scream. Doors slide open, you step inside, bodies pressed together in silent proximity. A soldier in camouflage fatigues grips the overhead bar across from you, U.S. Army Staff Sergeant insignia on his sleeve. His face is unreadable, disciplined, contained. You wonder what battles shaped that containment. Not all restraint is repression. Some restraint is earned. Just as Major Richard Winters of Easy Company, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, learned in Normandy, 1944, reaction without clarity costs lives. Emotion without control leads to chaos. Over time, soldiers learn not to fire at every movement in the hedgerow. They assess. They conserve ammunition. They wait. You are doing something similar now. You no longer fire at every perceived threat. And because of that, you appear different. Quieter. Harder to provoke. Harder to categorize. But here is the grief no one prepares you for. When you outgrow your reactions, you also outgrow certain versions of intimacy. Some people loved you through your volatility, through your passionate defenses, through your visible wounds. They knew how to comfort that version of you. Now, when you sit calmly across from them, untriggered, unshaken, they don't know where to place their care. You seem self-contained. And self-containment can look like distance. You feel it in small ways. Fewer late-night calls. Shorter conversations. Less emotional urgency. No conflict, no confrontation. Just drift. And drift is lonelier than war. You begin questioning yourself. Was your reactivity the thing that made you relatable? Did your intensity create connection? Are you becoming too distant, too indifferent? But when you search honestly, you don't find indifference. You find discernment. There are still things that move you deeply, but they are rarer now, more specific, less ego-driven. An injustice that once would have triggered personal offense now registers as structural, impersonal. You no longer internalize everything. And because of that, fewer things penetrate. This is not coldness. It is filtration. But filtration reduces noise, and noise was once part of your social frequency. That evening you scroll through old messages. Arguments, emotional paragraphs, long explanations of how you felt and why. You can almost feel the old pulse in those words. There is something admirable about that past self. They were alive, raw, immediate. They fought to be understood. You pause over one message in particular, a long defense you wrote years ago at 2:13 a.m., typing with trembling thumbs. You barely recognize the voice. Not because it was wrong, but because it was so urgent. So desperate to secure belonging. And here you are now, months or years later, able to let a sharp message sit unanswered on a kitchen counter. The growth is real. But so is the distance from who you were. And distance, even from yourself, carries loneliness. The train slows, your stop approaches. You glance once more at the message from earlier. You begin typing. Not defensive, not reactive. Measured. Clear. Short. You press send. No adrenaline, no spike. Just steadiness. The doors open, cold air rushes in. As you step onto the platform, a realization moves through you with quiet force. You are not losing connection with the world. You are losing connection with the version of yourself that needed the world to feel safe. And that shift changes everything. Because if you no longer need to defend who you are, then who are you when no defense is required? November 2nd, 6:36 p.m. A small apartment living room lit by a single lamp in the corner. Outside, rain presses softly against the windows. Inside, the air is still. You sit on the edge of the couch, elbows resting on your knees. The room is clean, ordered, no emotional debris scattered across it, no tension vibrating beneath the surface. And yet something feels unsettled. Not because something happened, but because nothing did. Earlier today, a conversation ended without escalation. A topic that once would have ignited a full internal storm passed through you like weather that no longer recognizes your address. You nodded, you listened, you let it go. And now, in the quiet of this room, there's an unexpected ache. Growth is supposed to feel triumphant. But this feels like loss. Carl Jung believed that as the personality evolves, certain psychic structures fall away. Defensive identities, the sharp-tongued protector, the hypersensitive interpreter, the ever-vigilant analyst, begin to dissolve when they are no longer needed. They do not leave dramatically. They fade, like soldiers returning from a war that has quietly ended. Think of Captain Dale Dye, U.S. Marine Corps, after years of combat advisory service in Vietnam. When he returned home, the war did not follow him in visible explosions, but the habits did: the alertness, the reflex, the readiness. And when those reflexes eventually softened, there was relief. But also disorientation. Because the hypervigilant self had become familiar. Your reactive self was familiar too. Predictable, reliable, fierce. It made you feel defined. Without it, you feel open. And openness is not always comfortable. You rise from the couch and walk toward the bathroom mirror. The light hums overhead, your reflection stares back, calm, composed, unguarded. You search for the old intensity in your eyes. It isn't there. Not the defensive edge, not the readiness to counter. Instead, there is something steadier, quieter. But quieter can feel smaller if you're not used to it. There was a time when your identity sharpened itself against conflict. You knew who you were because you knew what you resisted, what you opposed, what you would not tolerate. Reaction gave you clarity. Without reaction, identity feels less outlined. From a Jungian perspective, this is the terrain of individuation, the movement away from reflexive identity toward integrated selfhood. But integration is subtle, it does not shout. It hums. And when the shouting stops, the hum can feel like emptiness. You remember a specific night years ago. 1:07 a.m., a parked car outside someone's house. Rain streaking across the windshield, you arguing not recklessly but passionately, every word precise, every feeling amplified. You left that car shaking, not broken, alive. Alive in the intensity of being misunderstood. Alive in the effort to be seen. That version of you believed that emotional combustion was proof of depth. Now depth looks different. Now you can sit across from someone who misreads you and feel no urgency to correct them. You understand yourself well enough that misinterpretation does not threaten your core. That is strength. But strength without friction can feel invisible. The loneliness here is not about people leaving. It's about not being mirrored the same way. When you were reactive, people responded to your edges, they met your intensity with intensity, they knew how to approach you through contrast. Now you offer fewer edges. And the world does not always know how to engage with smooth surfaces. You find yourself speaking less in group settings, not because you are intimidated but because you are selective. Words feel heavier now, more intentional. Silence is no longer defensive. It is chosen. But chosen silence reduces noise, and noise once created connection. There is another layer to this grief. Your old reactions were built for survival. They emerged in environments where quick defense was necessary, where emotional vigilance kept you safe, where interpreting tone correctly prevented harm. Those instincts deserve respect. They carried you through rooms that were not designed for softness. So when they begin to fade, part of you feels almost disloyal. As if by not reacting, you are abandoning the younger self who needed those defenses. But maturity is not betrayal. It is evolution. The battlefield changed. The armor is no longer required. And yet, removing armor always feels vulnerable, even if the war has ended. You return to the living room and turn off the lamp. The room falls into shadow, illuminated only by streetlights slipping through the curtains. You sit again. Stillness no longer feels like a tactic. It feels natural. You consider the messages on your phone, the conversations that didn't escalate, the provocations that no longer hook you. You are not suppressing. You are not numb. You are simply no longer identified with every emotional ripple. From a Jungian perspective, this is the ego relaxing its grip, no longer scrambling to defend its narrative at every turn. And yet there is an undeniable truth. You are becoming someone unfamiliar. And unfamiliarity, even with yourself, carries loneliness. But beneath that loneliness, something else is forming. A quieter identity. Not built around reaction. not defined by opposition. An identity that exists even when no one challenges it. You sit in the dark long enough to feel it. A stable center. It does not flare. It does not prove. It does not perform. It simply is. And slowly the grief shifts. Because you begin to understand. You are not losing yourself. You are shedding the version of yourself that only existed in resistance. And what remains is not emptiness. It is space. Space to respond rather than react. Space to choose rather than defend. Space to be calm without feeling erased. But the final question lingers in the quiet room. If your identity is no longer forged in emotional fire, what will shape it now?